Hi, I'm Marissa Gavami, the founder and CEO of Healing Tree, and I'm really excited to have Dr. David Grand, who is the developer of Brainspotting and an acclaimed author, here with me today. Thank you so much for joining me. So one of the founding principles of Healing Tree and a core part of our mission is to take the information that the trauma experts know, like yourself, and really bridge the knowledge gap between professionals across fields, mental health, medical professionals, et cetera, and the public at large, since trauma affects, unfortunately, so many of us on some end of the spectrum. So today, I would really love it if you would talk to everyone about just basics. What is trauma? What are the contexts in which one can be traumatized, and how does it impact the brain? And then I'd love to go into a little bit about trauma treatment. So what makes for effective brain-based trauma therapy, and why, and how we can help people heal.
Well, as you see, I've brought my brain with me.
Yes.
And I take my brain wherever I go. I actually, as a brain-based therapist, I have my brain sitting right on my desk next to me, and I make references to the brain as we're doing therapy, and I'll talk about that as far as brain-based therapy goes. But trauma is the normal response to a totally abnormal set of experiences. And it's really an important definition because people can feel so not normal when they have trauma symptoms. But in essence, you put a normal person through a traumatic situation, and they're going to have flashbacks and hypervigilance, being very aware of whatever's happening, too aware, nightmares, they call it fear of reoccurrence, which means the fear that it's going to happen again, but in such an inordinate way that it really just cripples a person. Also, a lot of trauma is felt in the body, with body anxiety and things such as that. But to really explain trauma, you do have to understand how trauma works in the brain, or in a sense doesn't work in the brain.
When you say trauma, I think a lot of people hear that word and they think of, war or rape or physical violence. Can you give everyone just a brief context of what you mean when you say trauma?
That's an excellent way of framing it. Trauma is something that everybody experiences as part of life. We all lose people who are near and dear to us. We have accidents. We see accidents. A lot of trauma is actually secondary or vicarious trauma, by actually seeing trauma happening to somebody else. But really, we come into this world, it's traumatic. We come in from this wonderful womb that's warm and comfortable and safe, and we have everything we need, and we're propelled out, and all of a sudden, it's cold and stark, and we have to breathe for ourselves and eat for ourselves. That's where we have the term birth trauma. There's also the term developmental trauma, which refers to the traumas that happen throughout childhood, starting really from infancy, and we call it preverbal times, where there's no language. So a child who experiences, or a baby who experiences a trauma, really has no words for it, and that's why they can't find words for it in adulthood. But it happens really throughout life, and you can't escape life without being traumatized, even though we have certain almost stereotypic senses of what trauma is. So everybody really has trauma, and some people have more than others. We have what's called complex trauma, which is more where a person has many different traumas, and they become interwoven into the brain. And really, to understand trauma from a brain point of view, you have to understand how the brain works. The brain has 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. A quadrillion is if you take a billion and multiply it by a million. Yeah. It is literally infinite. There are more connections in the brain than there are stars in the universe. So why do we have so many infinite connections in the brain? Because the brain is the ultimate processing machine. The brain is processing everything that's going on in our bodies and in our brain. The brain processes itself. And it also processes everything that's going on around us. And it has to take it and organize it together so that we have a sense of who we are and where we are and what we're doing. But what happens is when we're traumatized, this amazing processing machine gets overwhelmed. It breaks down, and parts of the trauma are not fully processed through and are left behind frozen in the brain.
So could this be from one big event and also several quote-unquote smaller events?
When you look at it, some people go through bigger traumas and are not as affected. Some people go through smaller traumas and are highly affected. Usually, if a person is highly affected by a smaller trauma, it's because they have prior trauma, and it's a re-traumatization. And if a person goes through a major trauma and isn't traumatized, and doesn't just look that way, but really is that way, is that their foundation of experience is stronger.
The
and more
resiliency.
Exactly. So from a brain point of view, and this will move us ahead towards brain-based therapy as well. Have a little anatomy lesson here. We have the reptilian brain that all reptiles have, and we call it our brain stem. Then we have the mammalian brain that all mammals have, that sits on top of their reptilian brain. This is also called the limbic brain or the limbic system. This is really where our emotional selves are, our intuitive selves are. And on top of that, we have the human brain, otherwise known as the neocortex, that only primates have, but humans have the most developed neocortex of all. So we have this neocortex that sits on top of the mammalian brain, that sits on top of the reptilian brain. Everything below the neocortex is called the subcortex. So if I throw that fancy word at you, you'll know where that's coming from. Now, getting back to trauma. When the brain gets traumatized and doesn't fully process through the trauma, it is generally held in the subcortex, down here in the mammalian and the reptilian brain, where there's no language and no thought, just feeling, just intuitive sense and body sense. So in that context, in order to have successful psychotherapy, there has to be therapy that is able to bypass the neocortex, the thinking, language, human brain, to get to the subcortex. That is the limitation of talk therapy. And the key thing in talk therapy is the relationship. It's not the talking. Mm-hmm. It's the relationship between two people. And any psychotherapy, including brain-based therapy, has to be relationally based first and foremost. Because for a person to really open up and share and change, they have to feel the humanness of that therapist sitting in front of them. And it has to be a trusting flow between the two people. And by the way, just informationally, information travels up in the brain primarily from the subcortex up to the neocortex. Very little information travels down this way. So you can talk about a trauma, and you can talk about it endlessly. That's where people will say, well, I understand everything, but I feel the same way.
Right.
Because you didn't get down to this. Now, my therapy that you mentioned off the top is Brainspotting. Brainspotting is a brain-based therapy. There are many brain-based therapies now. And what we do in Brainspotting is we use eye position, where a person looks, to find where that unprocessed trauma is in this deeper subcortical brain. That's a crucial thing for it, because what happens is these traumas are not only unprocessed, but they kind of get lost, or we use the term dissociated. Dissociated means that the person doesn't know that they're there, and they don't know where they are either. So you need a brain-based therapy, but you need one that will particularly help the brain, this deeper brain, to locate the lost, unprocessed trauma within itself. Keep the focus on it, and then the brain takes over and then processes through in the therapy process. And sometimes it can be quick, sometimes it takes longer if it's complex, to process it through in the way that it didn't get processed through the first time around.
Sure. Do you have anything that you would say to someone, maybe offer some encouragement, who has been through a lot of therapy before and just doesn't feel like they can get any better, feels like they're really broken, like there's something really wrong with them?
Trauma is very treatable. Okay, it can be very crippling, it can be very painful, it can be very debilitating, but it's also very treatable. But it needs a brain-based therapy. When we say brain-based therapy, we should also say body-based therapy.
Sure.
Because what's in the brain is in the body, and what's in the body is in the brain. So to really work on a brain basis, the therapy has to be body aware. In other words, well, where are you feeling it now? So if you have the person bring up the memory of a trauma, they're going to feel it in their body as well as maybe see it or smell it or just feel the anxiety. But you want to know where they're feeling in the body, because that helps you to see where it is in the brain. This is another way that you locate the lost trauma in the brain, because what we feel in the body comes up in the brainstem and is located in here. It's felt here, then it goes back into the body. This is that brain-body loop.
Absolutely.
Which is a crucial part of successful, effective trauma therapy.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of everybody at Healing Tree, We're so glad to have you on our team as one of our advisors, and I just thank you. If there's anything that you'd like to share just about from your perspective as an expert of why we need to continue doing this work, I'd appreciate it.
Help is available. Healing Tree is there to not only get the information out, but to help connect up people who are looking for the help with the right kind of help. So that's why Healing Tree is so important, because it serves both to provide the information, also to provide the bridge for people who are looking for help with trauma.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, David.
My pleasure.